This video is about consulting as a side hustle, one that's separate from your actual job. There's a lot of benefits to that. There's also some drawbacks. There are a lot of arborists, including myself, get into consulting for themselves this way, but whether you can keep it up is going to depend on your circumstances, how hard you personally want to work, how much work is available, things like that, whether it makes sense from a financial standpoint. So I'll have a pros section, a cons section, and some tips if you wanted to get started doing it as a side hustle specifically. Here are some of the pros of doing consulting as a side hustle. First of all, you have the stability of your normal job. You can have benefits, you can have guaranteed paycheck. You're not subject to the ebbs and flows, which are very common with self-employment, entrepreneurship, and consulting arboriculture as a whole. That has the extra benefit of you being able to do things at a pace where maybe you're setting up things like systems, how you want to intake clients, how you want to do your reports. There's a lot of time for you to learn things along the way without having to scramble to get that information, because all of a sudden you have a ton of work and you need to get a grasp on things. In the same vein, you could be selective about the work that you take, assuming that you have a lot of enough experience and stability to be picky. For example, you could identify a red flag client and know that you can turn those people down. You can also apply this to clients or projects that don't match your values. Like if you don't like development projects, you can turn them down. But if you're full-time and this is a big income stream, you don't have that same sort of luxury later on. Another benefit is that tree consulting has a low overhead. Even if you're doing it legally, low can mean different things to different people. But if you're in the industry and you want to do tree work on the side, for example, there's a lot of expenses that come with that. You'd have to get equipment, vehicles, all sorts of things, and that stuff adds up quick. Whereas for consulting, you can get started very easily in terms of the actual equipment. Most people have a computer, most people have a car. It could be very low to start, and that makes it easy to dip your toe in and to see if you actually want to do it or not. There are a lot of people that assume that consulting is just talking to people about their trees. A lot of it is that, but there's also parts of it that you might not necessarily enjoy. Maybe you had considered going down that route of starting a consulting business and you realize you don't even like it. At least you've gotten the chance to figure that out before you went all in on it and quit your actual job. In the early stages, when you have this luxury of time, you could make mistakes that would have more weight when you're solely dependent on the consulting income. For example, if you underbid a consultation or underbid a project cost, you can just, it doesn't hurt as much to just eat the cost if you're not depending on that money. So you can slowly learn over time how to bid your jobs better so that when it actually matters, you'll be well established already. Another benefit is that if you are doing this on the side, chances are you're doing it evenings, nights, weekends. That could give you a leg up because there are going to be people who are doing consulting work that treat it like a full-time job, and they may not want to work outside of business hours. But you will also have clients who have their own full-time jobs and they don't want to have to take time off work to meet with a consultant. You could win those clients. Another benefit is that if you can get started on the side, then if anything happens to your W-2 job, you might be able to just fall back on the side consulting, whether that's temporary or you start to go all in on it. You already have that foundation that's set up and you're not scrambling to figure out how you can suddenly boost up this entire consulting business because you got laid off or lost your job or quit or something like that. Another thing is if your current job is boring, but it pays the bills, like it's just a job to you and it helps support your life, consulting, specifically taking on projects that you actually enjoy, could bring a different kind of variety and some extra spice to your working life, and it could feel really fun if you were able to do what you want it to. Now, on to the drawbacks. A lot of this assumes that you're doing things legally. Although I did say that the overhead is low, it's still going to be several $1,000s a year to at least have a business entity like a LLC and to have insurance to protect yourself, because there's something called professional liability that you have to get because you're offering professional advice, and that could have consequences as far as like negligent advice, for example. And in order to do that, you have to make sure that you work enough to justify that cost of the insurance. You don't want to just do enough work to only pay for your insurance, so you might have to work more than you actually want it to. Another point is, if you are in the tree industry, specifically working for a tree service or something like that, you might be competing directly with your employer, in which case that could have consequences for your job. They could fire you, and I've heard of that happening. Another point is, if you are working a full-time job, then you're going to be working overtime all the time. You can't go during your work hours unless you're a part-timer, and you just have to go after work, and you just have to work on weekends. It just depends on how long you can keep that up. In certain seasons, like in the fall and the winter, the sun would go down early, so once you get off work, it might be dark already. So you can't actually do any site visits during the weekdays if you get off at regular times. And those are things that you have to keep in mind too. So now you're giving up a lot of weekends. If you are not able to work during the regular business day, you may be turning away clients that want to meet with you at that time. For example, if you're meeting an engineer who is full-time employed by another company, or they have regular work hours, typical work hours, or there's certain categories of work. For example, construction has very specific hours that they're allowed to work. You have to have a fairly flexible schedule, and most consultants know that they have to adjust their schedules that way, and you have to get out there when they actually need you. And if you have a full-time job and you don't have that flexibility, you're going to lose out on that work. Another issue is that if you're employed as an arborist in whatever capacity, and if your employer is paying for your certifications and renewals and things, you lose out on certain marketing opportunities, like the ASCA directory, the ISA directory. If there's a city arborist list, people aren't going to be able to find you and your side business as easily as if you were full-time. If you have a full-time job and you can't take time off, you might also be missing out on workshops and conferences if your company isn't willing to pay. Those are valuable learning opportunities that you otherwise might get with a more flexible schedule. If you attended any outreach or marketing or whatever salesy type events for your company, you will have to work harder on not promoting yourself, because I had a hard time with this too. Sometimes I just wanted to say like, oh, I'm working for myself as well, blah, 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 but that's in direct conflict with my primary employer. So you have to be able to manage the ethics around that and to control your own behavior, assuming that you're behaving ethically. These last two cons or drawbacks are related to not doing things properly. So the first thing would be if you were to not create an LLC or something like that, and you have your business expenses mixed in with your personal expenses, you don't have separate accounts, then that can be more complicated in the future if you decide to go full-time and become an official business. Now everything's kind of like mixed together. It's cleaner if you can keep them separate in the beginning. Similarly, if you're not sure that if you don't have a lot of consulting experience to begin with, then the idea of paying so much money for insurance is going to be daunting. If you are someone who is new and you're not careful enough you don't have a lot of consulting training, the chances of you getting sued for saying something that you shouldn't have said are a lot higher. So I feel in some ways having insurance as a new consultant is even more important. Another issue with not having insurance is that there are a lot of companies that require insurance to work on projects. And this isn't just big companies like government contracts or large private companies. It could be really small ones too. So you're gonna miss out on a big percentage of work because you don't have insurance. If you're thinking of doing consulting on the side, here are some steps that I suggest you take. Number one, try doing some free consulting or consulting for a low fee if you're not experienced enough to see if you actually like it. This will start off with most likely consulting for homeowners, and it's a good way to maybe attract some clients when you don't have much of a presence, and to just get in the habit of teaching people, get some practice. I find that the first client is someone that you end up doing way too much for. Like if you're writing a report that's way too long, maybe you're spending extra time on their property, just consider that all practice. My second recommendation is to create an LLC, get a business bank account, get insurance. If you plan to grow the business in the future and maybe move into it more full time, you have this foundation set from the very beginning. You don't have to go for the best insurance. You can also just do bare minimum. You can find a provider that's cheaper. Usually this is through insurance brokers. Chances are that the cheap insurance broker, the service is gonna correlate to the price. But if you just need some kind of a protection, something is better than nothing. My friend told me that she was able to get insurance for about $1,000 a year when she first started. For me, it was around $3,000, but I really liked my broker and she didn't like hers. So you'll get what you pay for. My next suggestion is to use this opportunity to continue learning, boost up your knowledge and your education, because you are representing yourself now. You're starting to build your reputation, and it's really important to be someone who's very informed, and that's what sets you aside from your competition. It's much better to get in the habit of doing things right and doing things well at the very beginning than it is to do things sloppily and, partway through, years down the road, you suddenly decide that you want to do better, you want to be more comprehensive. It's hard to kick the habit of that. My next tip is that you should go to consulting academy once you can afford it, especially if you're new to consulting and you don't have mentors. Like I said, there's gonna be a lot of stuff that you might say that you shouldn't be saying, and the academy will be a little bit of a boost to learn some of those nuances. It's only an overview, so don't have overly high expectations, but it's going to be better than nothing. Related to that, if you do not have mentors, then find one as soon as possible. Someone in your area, preferably, who's willing to give you information, to help you along the way, because the mistakes that you make when you're consulting for yourself are going to come down on you. They're not coming down on your employer. Lastly, take it slow and appreciate the time that you have while you have the luxury of being able to do that. When you're employed by someone else, the mistakes you make are not going to be as heavy. So use that time to make the mistakes, to be more selective about who you take on, to think about how you would really want to do things, and plan for something a little bit more long term if you have the capacity for it, just in case this is something that you want to grow into something bigger. And to end the video, I'll just talk about my experience with consulting as a side hustle, which was something I did for a year and a half, maybe 2 years before I moved on. Your experience is not going to be like this, because this company was hella cool, like so cool about it. They agreed to move me from a consulting position to an admin position so that there wasn't that conflict of interest of me doing consulting both for them and for myself. And frankly, I didn't want to do that for them, because it takes a different kind of energy. So I was helping with phones, emails, basic arborist reports, just a lot of random shit. But I'd been there for so long that I knew how they did everything. So it made sense to have me in that position. I asked them for referrals. So not only was I directly competing with them, I asked them for referrals, and there was still an in-house consulting arborist. The company agreed to it. I gave them a referral fee. What would happen is I would get a request. I would send it to the in-house consultant, and if she didn't have the capacity for it, then she would send it to my side business email. And that's how we did. Got a couple of referrals from them that way. We also agreed to split the cost of my certification renewals because I would be using them myself as well, and they still got to benefit from having me as an arborist, just an in-house one. At some point, I wanted to have more time to work on my business, so I asked to go down part-time to 4 days a week. There was a point at which I didn't have access to a computer. I was like partly homeless, floating around at that point, and they were like, you need to use a computer, you need to use our internet, feel free. Yeah, the last thing is they still continue to send me referrals now. I don't pay them a fee anymore, but if they really can't take it on, then they send me the client and I do my usual thing. Yeah, if that's something that you've been considering, you should try it out. That's the entry point for a lot of arborists, for sure.